if we talk about fragile countries, conflict and violent conflict is clearly one of the main reasons for the underdevelopment of these countries, and the fact that the fragile countries remain fragile for a while. So, and economists and other researchers are very good explaining conflict by looking at the cultural explanation, geographical explanation, historical explanation, all these things that we cannot do anything about. So if you read all these explanations, like these countries are doomed. They're fragile and they will always be fragile because this is a long-term effect. So this approach is very satisfactory intellectually, but it's very, in terms of policy work, is a bit problematic. So the question was whether we can do anything practical to try to affect the security situation on the ground. And one potential way we can tool that is at our hands is the foreign aid and some kind of aid that comes to the fragile states. The problem with that approach was that if you look at the macro level, like giving aid to countries as a whole, as we've seen from the work of Nathan, that's actually a very problematic approach, especially in fragile countries. I mean, as Nathan have shown, there's giving in-kind aid to countries, especially fragile countries, actually can backfire and lead to very problematic outcomes. So the question is, what is it specific to this like macro level country aid, and is it different if we look on the ground at a more specific foreign aid, and not only foreign, but aid projects that are targeting particular communities, and whether these interventions can help. And ideologically, this approach of giving aid to particular communities and hoping that will turn these people in these communities away from being involved in, especially in violent conflict, especially in insurgency, has basically is very well known by the strategy of winning hearts and minds. And it's exactly as a strategy, as a military strategy, it has a long tradition, like at least on the record from the colonial wars of French in Indochina, that this is like way how you fight insurgency. You provide good things to local population. Local population is changing their changing minds and hearts. They now kind of love you, and they don't fight you. The problem with that approach was that it's actually been tried in including recently in very different contexts, in Iraq and Afghanistan and Philippines, and there are mixed kind of feelings about this, especially if we talk about winning just hearts. I mean, if all these nice pictures of hanging out with kids, everyone loves you, but then the adults who are much more rational, like they love you during the daylight, and at night they kill you. So it's actually turns out like winning the minds is way more important than winning hearts. And winning minds is basically when you can provide credibly, especially when we're talking about fragile states in which local population does not have a good experience of dealing with the government. If we talk about Afghanistan, if we look at the local villages, they've never seen anything good coming from the government. They've never seen any public goods coming. The only time they see state is when they collect taxes, bring whatever, like military, etc. Like they don't have a good experience of government. But this is exactly gives, in some sense, an opportunity if you manage to provide something like public goods or development projects to the local population, make it clear that it's provided by the government. The hope is that will change completely how they treat the government. It will improve their attitudes, and they will rationally, through their mind, understand that government is something that can bring you good, so you will not be fighting it. And that is the kind of the idea of some development project, including this the project of National Solidarity Program that we're studying in our research, and it's very clearly like that. Part of it is obviously it's just development. Like let's improve the lives of the people and bring public goods to them, including like drinking wells that are safe and are much more convenient for collecting water. But also it will signal very clearly that this is a public good provided by the government. And this is like in this program, it was very clearly signaled that this is something good, and this good thing is brought to you by the government. And the idea was that not only we improve the lives of people by providing these services, we improve their attitudes towards government, and that can be helpful in general in nation building effort in Afghanistan, but it can be reflected very kind of clear, like something that was very much of a concern in Afghanistan in violence, in the reduction in violence, in their ability, in the participation of the local people in insurgency. And that, I mean, we are talking actually about, like, the important thing is that we have to talk about the public goods that are really kind of noticeable, and there's something that is really valuable by the people in these villages. And in this context, that was the case, because like the conditions of life there are in Afghanistan are not particularly good, to say the least. So basically, building like one drinking well for a whole village is a huge change in the quality of life in these villages. So that is important to understand in the context why there was some hope that these public goods can actually lead to long-lasting effects. The problem with this with testing this approach empirically, and it has been tested in other countries, is again the same thing that academics like to talk all about. Is this endogeneity? That if you just compare places that receive public goods and development projects from the government, with the places that don't, there's clearly a reason for that. In Afghanistan, I mean, if you see, like, it's really hard to provide public goods in areas controlled by Taliban, and they don't receive, like, they receive much less of that. So if you compare places that received aid and don't, like, partly you control areas that control the government and controlled by Taliban, obviously you will see difference in security situation there. So the question was how to deal with it, and again, the beloved approach of academics, which is like not always supported by policymakers and practitioners, is to do experiments. And this is exactly what happened in Afghanistan. We were in a situation which was a next round of financing of this National Solidarity Program, and they had money basically for to cover another 250 villages. So what we agreed with the people managing the program is that, and they were rolling out in 10 different districts. So we said, okay, let's do the following. Let's, in this 10 districts, let's select 500 villages that are eligible, that by your criteria could receive this program. And then what we'll do, we'll randomly select half of them, 250 will receive this program. Another half will receive it in the next round of financing when you will have money. And it was known that the next round of financing will be in 4 years. And that's exactly what we did. Basically, in each of the 10 districts, half of the villages, that green here, received this aid, and another half, in red here, all these villages were scheduled to receive aid in 4 years' time. And then we basically trace what's going on over these 4 years in these two sets of villages. And another important point was that I actually the districts, as you'll see, are spread out around Afghanistan. And just to understand the context, these are the areas that are that are still under the control of the government. So as you notice, we were not being able to work in the southern part of Afghanistan, which is basically partly controlled by Taliban, but basically the government was there, not really strong there. So these are the places which are still under the control of the government, but there's always a risk of them turning to the side of insurgency and increasing the violence there and attacking the government. So these are the places that are on the verge of switching sides. And what we did is basically then there's a simple thing, like we trace what happens in these villages over the course of the next 4 years, and whether you observe violent incidents and all the, we have a measure of what's going on in terms of violence from the ISAF military files. We know all the security incidents in Afghanistan, so we can see whether the exchange of fire, whether more IEDs around the villages that receive aid, and we compare basically what's going on in the vicinity of the villages that received aid compared to what's going on in the vicinity of the villages that have not received aid in these controlled villages that we had. And what's shown here is like if you look from the center of the village and then you move out up to like 15 kilometers, and you look at how many security incidents you observe in these villages that receive this aid compared to the villages that have not received aid, you'll see that both in midline is like in halfway through the program, like 2 years, in the first 2 years, you see that in the villages nothing happens, but right outside the villages, in the places that could have been attacked if the local population of the villagers decides to switch sides and join insurgency, or provide or literally join and participate in attacks, or provide information about, to the insurgents, or shelter insurgents, in any way support insurgency in these villages, in these areas that could be potential areas of attack from this village, you observe less security incidents. And this effect persists and becomes even stronger 4 years after the start of the program, when all the projects are completed and villages receive development aid in full. So basically what we see, like on average, this program, at least, turned out to be successful in not only in bringing public goods and improving the life of the people in these villages, which we also observe. We also, what happens is that it improves attitudes towards the government, that we also observe in our surveys. And what is more important for us in this study is that actually it does reduce violence. So and this is very important point for policymakers, and very basically in contrast to the findings of the global level that Nathan was talking. Like if you make sure that the development aid actually ends up in places where it's not captured in the, while being provided, which is one of the potential explanations for the negative results that Nathan was talking about. If we actually manage to deliver it to people, that actually can have a positive effect on security situation. So that is this is a kind of one very, as was mentioned, we have a lot of pessimistic results on security in academia. So these are results, a couple of basically come with crisp results. So like they're on the positive side. You actually can do something and positive, and you can actually can affect security situation. But actually it turns out a bit more nuanced than that, because as I was showing on the map, there are different districts, and this to this, they're kind of special. They are bordering Pakistan. And what's going on there is that in all other places, all the insurgency is kind of locally based. People who participate in insurgency are local people. So we provide aid to local people, they improve their lives, they feel better towards government, they don't participate in insurgency, everything is fine. Here it's much more complicated. Here, local people also participate in insurgency, but a huge role is played by foreign military, or people like just other people who basically come from the other side of the border. And there, even if you think about what's going on there, you improve the lives of people in villages. They may even feel better towards government. We don't know, but it doesn't matter. They are not the ones. If we think about the effect on insurgency, it doesn't matter, because these are not the people who participate in insurgency. People who participate in insurgency, they come from the other side of the border, and there, it can be exactly the other way around. Like people, like you give them aid, and the insurgents can attack them because they receive aid from government, so they want to prevent this from happening. They become targets of attack. And this is actually what turns out to be the case. So if we look separately at places that are bordering Pakistan and not bordering Pakistan, the whole of this positive effect of aid is driven by places that are not on the border of Pakistan. In the border of Pakistan, the other thing happens. Actually, the number of security attacks right near villages, which means basically that these villages are being attacked, is increasing, both like in the 2 years and 4 years after the start of the program, and there's not much going on farther away from villages. So basically what happens is that the effect of these programs is very different, goes in the opposite direction depending on the local context. If we're talking about the context, if it's when the insurgency is locally based, it's local people, you give them aid, it improves their lives, they're less likely to participate in insurgency. This strategy of winning hearts and minds works. if you are in a context in which the insurgency or the fighting comes from foreign parties or the people who are not local one way or another, this strategy won't work, because you're winning hearts and minds of people, but of different people, not the people who are fighting with you. And that is like this is a cautionary tale. Like if you look at the conclusion, what we learn is that one is a positive note, that yes, actually providing development aid and for public goods, which actually are very directly linked to the government, can improve security situation and prevent people from switching on the side of insurgency. But it only works if the insurgency is locally based. If not, you just attract by providing aid, you attract attacks by external actors.